Hello friends and welcome. It's Sarah Liz and I wanted to share some simple cards with you today. I know a lot of us are gearing up for the holiday season. We have a lot of holiday cards to make. And for me, one of my very favorite ways to do that is with embossing folders because I give them to people and they have no idea how I did that. Then when you add in an element of metallic shine, I think you can make something that's really special pretty quickly. So here I have a panel of red cardstock. It's A2 size, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm just taking a darker red ink and I'm coming in from the bottom and blending about halfway, 2/3 of the way up to create a sort of ombre effect. And then just to darken that bottom, because I don't have a darker red ink, I brought in just the lightest little bit of black soot, but certainly if you had a darker red ink, you could do that. This is the Spellbinders embossing folder of the month for October, and I am just going to wet the back of my panel, right? I don't want to add water over top of the ink. And then I'm going to add that to my folder and I'm going to run it through my machine. Here's the thing about Spellbinders embossing folders. They are huge. You can fit a half sheet of 8 1/2 by 11 cardstock in there. Now this is a directional pattern, and so for this particular folder, if I want a portrait style card, I'm only going to get one panel. But if I wanted to do landscape cards, I could get two at once. And that is also a huge time saver for me when I go to make holiday cards. I'm bringing in a couple of die sets. The first one is an older set. It's the Nordic Ornaments, and I'm not using the Nordic elements. I'm just using the outline and then the topper. And then the sentiment is from the Snowflake Wishes. That one came out this year and it's so clever. So you get 3 different sentiments. There's sending, believe, and wishing. And they have this little space underneath them for then your sub greeting. And there's a ton of different stamps in there. A card to say hello, caring thoughts, some sparkle your way, a very happy birthday. So it kind of came out with a Christmas collection. I think this was in August, but it's an all occasions set. I love sets like this because when I don't want to use an emergency sentiment that's just a circle or just a strip, this is the kind of set that does that very easily. And so I can make a bunch of cards that just have room for one of these 3 types of sentiments. They all take up the same amount of room, and I'm good to go. So I just stamped and heat embossed in Christmas Magic, and it's going to say believe in Christmas Magic. And I'm going to cut the believe and then the topper for my ornament out of some gold foil cardstock. So here's my ornament. I cut just the base layer out of some vellum. And then here's the believe in Christmas Magic that's going to kind of layer on top of that. And you can see how just putting a little sentiment in the middle of an ornament is a lovely focal image. To add that little bit of shine that really steps up a card, I am coming in with some Delicata gold ink. I like Delicata as a metallic pigment ink. I have had troubles with other brands. I can't get them to dry. I get really frustrated, but this is the Golden Glitz. I have Delicata in 4 different colors and all of them have dried pretty well for me. Typically, I will heat set it because I'm impatient, but it will dry on its own. My initial plan was just to ink up the edges, but it wasn't quite vibrant enough. So while my ink is still wet, before I heat set it, I am just going to take some Brutus Monroe Gilded embossing powder and I am going to dip the very edges of this ornament into that embossing powder. So then I'll get that really rich, deep gold color on the very edges and it will fade in a little bit because of the Delicata ink. I'm heat setting very carefully. I let my heat gun warm up a ton and I'm keeping it moving and I'm pausing here and there. But this will also then heat set that Delicata ink, and even on vellum, it is not going to smear later. And I cannot tell you how happy I was when I finally found this ink. Huge shout out to LV Handcrafted who's been using it on her channel. And I was like, does it dry? Does it really dry? She was like, yeah, I don't have any problems with it. She's awesome. If you're not following her, check out LV Handcrafted. I'll try to link her below. I wanted to layer up the believe because my gold foil cardstock is really thin. And so my hack for that is that I have some really old kind of crummy craft cardstock and I don't use it for cards or card bases or anything. I just don't like the color of it. So I use it to layer behind gold. It's close enough in color that it doesn't stand out like a white or a black or something like that would behind your sentiment. And then I am adding glue very carefully behind those thin letters. This sentiment is where I'm going to be able to hide my glue behind the ornament. And so I want to make sure that the sentiment itself is glued on there really well. And I'm just going to center it in the middle. Obviously, I'm using the Nordic Ornaments, but you could use any ornament die for this. I love ornaments, all ornaments. I don't know what it is, if it's that they're symmetrical. In particular, I love when they come to a point at the bottom like this one. I will just leave a link below to all of my favorite ornament dies because I have an embarrassing collection. Like, it's ridiculous, you guys. But there's some really, really great ones out there. And because a lot of them have been out for a while, sometimes you can get really good deals on them. So I am adding my panel to my card base, and then I'm going to very carefully add my glue, definitely behind the strip, right? And then just tiny little bits behind the letters. You will be able to see the glue through the vellum, and that's what I'm trying to hide here. Then I also put some at the very top because I have that gold layered on top for the little hanging piece. I don't know what to call that. Is there a word for that? And then I will press that onto my panel. Now here's the thing. I'm adding vellum onto a deeply embossed panel. And so I found that I didn't have great contact, or some places where like pieces felt like they were curling. Well, the embossing around the edges of my vellum gives me just a couple more little places to hide little dots of glue. So I'm going to tack this down at that bottom tip and then on the right hand side, because that's the piece that was curling up, and that will finish up card number 1. For card number 2, we're going to go a little bit simpler still, and I cannot get over how much I love this card. This is the Evergreen 3D embossing folder from Spellbinders, and it's non-directional. So absolutely no matter what orientation of card you're making, you could run 2 of these through at once. And look at that emboss. That little bit of water was really important here because otherwise I'd have had cracking. But I just rub it with a baby wipe and I have no problems. Here I'm using the Christmas wreath add-on. There's a new set of like wreath building dies. They're pretty cool from Spellbinders right now. But I just want the hat. Like, I love sets like that for little accent pieces, little die cuts to add just that touch of texture, of layering, to step up a card that maybe is really just an embossing folder, or maybe it's really just some pattern paper. But it changes kind of the overall feel of the card. For my metallic accent on this card, I'm using Delicata Silvery Shimmer ink. And I want a lot of control. I really, really wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to get ink down in the valleys of this embossing folder. So this yellow rag is just a microfiber cloth. It's what I use to clean things up in my craft room. And I'm dipping it into the ink, I'm tapping, and then going very carefully over the raised areas. You could use a domed foam for this, but you don't have as much control. And I typically end up with at least 1 or 2 spots where the ink got into the valleys. This also gives a softer look to that ink, and I really like that. It's not saying, hey, wow, look at me, I'm all of this silver foliage. It's just that little hint of sparkle, especially when you tilt it in the light, and I love that. Then I'm gonna come in and we're gonna add just a greeting on the little snowman's hat, and you guys, I'm trying, you know I'm garbage at clean and simple, but I am trying to work on making simpler cards. I donate most of my cards to my mother-in-law, who sends more cards than any human I've ever met. And so I'm trying to make cards that have that feel. It feels like a Sarah Liz card. It feels like a sassy card, but isn't going to take 20 years because she goes through them faster than I can make them. And I love her for it. Okay, so here I just layered up. There's a couple little pieces for that top hat. And then here's the season's greetings. It's delicate, but not so delicate that you couldn't layer it up. And once again, I've got a top layer that is that gold foil, and then the bottom layer is that thick sort of yucky craft that I don't use for anything else, just for layering with gold cardstock, okay? I will take the little pokey end of my tool anywhere where that glue oozes out a little bit, and I can remove that, but I also tap those off on the back of my hand just to remove any places where there's too much glue. Then I will add that embossed panel to my card base, and I'm ready to start assembling the focal point of my card. So I have this season's greetings. Again, this comes from that same Christmas wreath add-on. That set is so good. It's got this beautiful tree, a nice big bow, an ornament, a snowman, a top hat with a scarf. Just it's wonderful. And so then it also has this season's greetings. I'm being really careful with my glue. Once again, I kind of tap it off on the back of my hand to remove any spots where that glue might seep out from underneath my wording. And then this is going to take a little bit of maneuvering. This is a deeply embossed panel, and it's a really delicate bit of wording. And so I am just working to place them where I want them. And then I put something heavy on it. And you guys, I just walked away for like 5-10 minutes to make sure that glue had time to start to dry and to grab onto the cardstock behind it. And then it's not a problem, right? Barely Art glue is great glue. It's really strong, but it does take just a little bit to grab. And normally I like that about it, but here it meant I had to walk away. To add the tittle onto the eye, I have found that it's easiest for me just to add it straight onto the card base. And so I'm coming in with little dots of glue, and then I'm just using the wax end of my pokey tool to pick up the tittle. And then of course there's an apostrophe in seasons. Let me tell you how many times I've forgotten that. You guys, I'm an English professor, but it's one of those things where sometimes I'm just typing too fast and I forget it. For just a little bit of dimension, I'm adding some 1mm black thin foam squares to the back of my top hat. I like black for this only because the card base and then the hat are really dark. I just think it hides it better. And so then I will remove the release paper, and I'm going to add a little bit of glue just so I have a tiny bit of float time to kind of figure out where exactly I want to put this. But we're going to keep it nice and simple here. I'm adding my little hat, that pop of red on the band on the hat. It makes me so happy. And that finishes up card number 2. For card number 3, I'm sticking with some deep, rich cardstock for my base. I love this sort of plummy color, and we're going to add little hints of gold. These don't have to be just holiday cards. Sometimes I just need a quick stash of birthday cards, right? I go through a lot of birthday cards. So this is the Autumn Serenade 3D embossing folder, and Spellbinders has a bunch of folders like this where there's sort of a little place to put a greeting. And so I'm gonna emboss first so I know where that spot's gonna be, and then I'm gonna bring in some of my most used sentiment stamps. I'm using the birthday wishes from this one, but both of these are from Waffle Flower. I will link them below. I just think these 2 sets cover all of the holidays. They've got that beautiful mix of like a nice scripty but slightly whimsical font, and then some blocky little sub-sentiments or additional pieces of wording that go with them that I love so much. Again, sometimes I use an emergency sentiment, but sometimes I don't want just a circle. These take up about the same amount of space for each of the sentiments, and so I can make a bunch of cards and a little stash that's like, hey, these are Waffle Flower emergency cards, and then just have a bunch of sentiments already made up, and I'll heat emboss like gold on white, white on black, and then they're just in a little bin that kind of goes with them. So here I stamped that birthday wishes, and then I heat embossed it in that Gilded embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. And to remove the anti-static powder, I just use a little pencil eraser, a really soft white pencil eraser, and it is gone really quick and easy. I should have probably done this before I embossed the panel, but I didn't think I was going to need it. I like sometimes to come in and create a brighter spot in the middle to draw your eye toward that focal point. So I'm just using some black soot distress ink, and I'm coming around the edges. This is nothing fancy, right? You could skip this, and honestly, by the time we're done adding the gold, I don't know how much you notice it. I notice it. I know that it's there, but again, probably you could skip that. So here again is my gold ink. It's the Golden Glitz from Delicata, and I'm using that same technique where I come in and I'm just using my finger to kind of add a little bit of that gold ink to the raised areas. But I felt like I wasn't getting enough ink, right? We did this before on the other card, and I wanted that softer look. But here I wanted, especially on these big leaves, right, where there's a large raised area, I wanted a brighter pop. And so I'm just using my finger. Again, I have far more control here than I would if I was using a domed foam. There are some big open spaces in between these leaves. There's no way I would be able to avoid them with a domed foam. If you haven't added ink to embossing folders, a couple things to keep in mind. If you're using a blending brush, the joy of the brush is that it will get down into the nooks and crannies. So if you try to use a blending brush over an embossing folder, you're going to have ink in the valleys. If you use a domed foam, because it is essentially a flat surface, right, with just a little bit of give, you're more likely to stick just to the top. In the first card, I used my white pigment ink pad and kind of went over all of those raised areas. That is also a foam, but it's softer than my domed foam. And so I have to be really, really careful, or that will also end up in the valleys of my embossing. So I'm coming back in one more time with my black soot distress ink. I really just wanted to draw the eye to that focal image. And I will then finish up my card by adding it to my panel. This is really a video that's about the techniques. And so in the description box below, I will certainly link what I've used, but I will link to lots of alternative products to give you ideas on how else you might be able to do this, other kinds of embossing folders that will work. And maybe you can shop your own stash and see what's in there that kind of fits that or is similar to that. I thought this needed just one more pop of a metallic something, and so I'm bringing in some flat back gold pearls from Pink Fresh Studio, and I will put just a trio right around our birthday wishes, and that will finish up card number 3. Please let me know which of these cards is your favorite. I think I have a favorite, but I'll probably change my mind tomorrow. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time.